Yes, he was rather an agreeable chap, as a matter of fact. The High Priest, I mean. After the military inspection, we played chess and talked philosophy the night through. It goes without saying I won every game and lacerated his logic like an eagle its prey. But he was not as devoid of all intellect as I had expected his entire species to be.
In 2013, 1 year before Divinity Original Sin made Larian a household name, they released a game that wasn't just a departure from the RPGs that had come before it, but also a departure from standard game genres entirely. True enough, the Total War franchise has successfully combined real-time strategy, 4X-like turn-based strategy, and political simulation. A major distinction, however, between the Total War games and Divinity Dragon Commander is that Dragon Commander also throws in third-person shooter combat that takes place simultaneously with the real-time strategy portions. You might be wondering how they pulled that off. Stick around, we'll get to it. To give you a brief introduction, your father, Sigurd I, cooperating with the wizard Maxos and a mysterious man known only as the Architect, conquered the land and created an empire within which peace reigned. You are the bastard son of Sigurd, your mother being a dragon making you a half-dragon with the ability to switch between beast and human form. Your other half-siblings killed your father and engaged in civil war. Maxos has turned to you to re-establish the empire under your rule. It's a simple opening for what will be the game's simple story. Before I talk about the tactical map, which after some character introductions is where you'll be making your plans and conducting your turns, I want to address some mistakes I think the game makes right off the bat. The first is the bogged down pacing of the beginning. Rather than allowing the player to get a few turns under their belt, get to grips with playing the game, you are instead introduced to new characters to converse with, one after another. Before turn 1, you'll talk with your wizard Maxos and learn more about the backstory and how the Empire came to be. Then be introduced to your first two generals, Edmund and Henry, learn what they're like and what they think of each other. After turn 2, you'll be introduced to 2 more generals, making up the full cast of 4. You get to know them also and can now find out what each general thinks about the other 3. After turn 5, you'll be introduced to all 5 of your council members, whose role it will be to present you with policy proposals. You talk to each to learn more about them. After turn 6, you will make your first informal decision on how to respond to a general, and the council will bring forth their first policy proposal, to which you will listen to each member for their advice, for or against. Of course, no one is forcing you to talk to these people. Indeed, on a second playthrough you likely won't or will at least skip through the dialogue to get to the important bits. But all these characters and choices make up the political simulation element, which is a big part of the game, so on a first playthrough you're likely to want all the information you can get, which means spending a lot of the beginning listening to people when you were looking forward to playing the game. The fact that it is a big part is why it's all thrust upon you so quickly, but staggering it a little more would have helped the initial pacing. The second is the way the game has no easing in period and treats you as if you know exactly what you're doing. This can be seen straight away before you even start the campaign when faced with the dragon selection. Each of the 3 dragons is described as having a different playstyle, and each come with 3 of their own pre-researched dragon powers and 1 pre-researched unit. Now, this choice, while irreversible, is quite minor, but you have no way of knowing this at the time. Neither do you know how the RTS and third-person shooter parts play, which makes choosing based on the powers and units presented pointless. You can't know how you're going to play the game without knowing, first, how to play the game. Why worry the player with the concern that they might pick a dragon that isn't to the playstyle they'll actually choose? If they did each have exclusive technologies, then I would recommend allowing the player to make that choice once they know what they're doing. However, none of these technologies are exclusive. You can research the powers and units of the other dragon forms very quickly, which means the initial choice is pretty much pointless anyway. Speaking of technologies, you are given 20 research points upon starting which are used to acquire dragon powers, units, and unit upgrades. Being given 20 straight away seems to suggest that you are supposed to research a few new technologies straight away, and to not do so might leave you at a disadvantage, all while still having not taken your first turn, and thus still not knowing how the battles even work. So with that covered, I'll move on to the tactical map, which also does a poor job of introducing new players to the game. In this phase you can purchase and move units, choosing which territories to defend, attack, and capture. You can also buy buildings, one being a war factory, which allows you to construct units on that territory, another a gold mine, which doubles the revenue of that territory, and the rest all generate different types of strategic cards every 3 turns. Some of these cards can be played while you plan your turn, perhaps allowing you to build a building for free or destroy a building in an enemy territory. The rest are played when preparing for a battle and can be useful in turning the tide. The reason I say this part also does a poor job with new players is because you are given no advice on initial objectives. Your ultimate goal is obviously to take over the map and take the enemy capital, but you are in no way instructed on what you should begin doing, which wouldn't be a problem if the game didn't, again, treat you like you know exactly what you're doing and play against you as such. Bar taking calamitously stupid risks, the only way you will ever lose in Dragon Commander is by not gaining the upper hand as quickly as you can. The issue is that it's like running a race where your opponent shouts go while you're still tying your shoelaces. According to Steam, I had a couple of hours on this game from 2014. All I remembered of that time is that I had been defeated only a few turns in, and obviously I had never bothered to try again. Little did I heed this experience, assuming that it had been down to my own incompetence, so I was positively shocked when the exact same thing happened.
And so our story ends with the tragic death of the Dragon Prince, and how Rivellon was consumed by eternal war. Wait, hold on an instant. That's not what really happened.
There are 3 chapters in Dragon Commander. At the beginning of each one, you will start with a small amount of territory. It is imperative that you blitzkrieg your way through the neighbouring territories as if you're attempting to establish an 1,000-year empire. Which, incidentally, you are. This is so important that if you don't do it, you will lose by turn 10. There can be no pussyfooting around here, no taking a territory and consolidating your defences. You need the resources of the captured territories and the security of a buffer zone as soon as possible. It's strange that a game with so many hints and pop-up tutorials makes no effort to warn you that immediate rapid expansion is a necessity. Once you've secured this though, you won't face the threat of total defeat again, though you will eventually get bogged down the closer you get to an enemy's capital, as they will have nowhere left to buy units and so will just continue to stack them up there, forcing you, in turn, to stack units until you can finally overpower them. You can, of course, attempt to take their capitals with equal or even lesser odds, but you probably won't want to. In fact, you probably won't want to take any battle without a moderately high percentage chance of winning. Let's talk about entering combat. Each unit in a territory piles in a nice neat stack, and you can choose how many of these units you want to move. If you move onto an unoccupied territory, or an enemy territory with no units on it, you take the territory immediately, provided at least one of your units is ground-based, as sea and air units cannot capture. If there is an enemy unit though, then a battle will take place once you end your turn. You will be given a percentage chance to win, which will be updated with each additional unit you move into the territory. This is useful as Dragon Commander allows you to undo any move you're planning to make in a turn, meaning that if your chances don't look good, then you can recall all your units and the battle won't take place. The flip side to this, however, is that you will always make the first move of any given turn. You can only act, never react. Unlike your opponents who, upon witnessing your intentions to attack, can subsequently reinforce the territory by transporting neighbouring units in and, if the territory has a war factory, directly purchasing the units as well. This can make planning your moves quite frustrating and had me generally lean towards an overly cautious approach because you can only guess as to whether you will be intercepted or blocked in what initially seems like a safe bet move. Your chance to win is affected by a number of factors, primarily the strength and amount of units. If you have 4 troopers to their 2, you're almost certain to win. But if you have 4 troopers to their 1, but they also have a hunter, then things will get trickier. If you have 4 troopers to their 2 devastators, you're probably going to lose. Before you choose to attack, you should be aware of how firmly the enemy are entrenched in a territory, and also how popular you are with the race whose lands you're in. The more entrenched one is, the more bonus units they get, and the more or less popular you are affects your chance to win. Finally, you can spend some money to select one of your 4 generals to increase your odds. Each have their own traits which make them useful in different situations, but you just click on each one to see which improves your chances the most. Then, if you so choose, you can play any battle-specific cards you might have. All of these only last for that one battle. Mercenary cards will provide extra units. Dragon skill cards will provide powers not yet researched. Unit acquisition cards will allow you to recruit units not yet researched. Unit advantage cards will buff your units. Unit subversion cards will nerf the enemy's units. However, only the mercenary cards will affect your chances of winning via auto-resolve in any noticeable way. The other 4 types are only useful if you plan to take the fight manually in a real-time strategy battle. Once you've done all this, you click ready and watch as the little icons blow each other up. If you lose, all your units die. If you win with at least 1 ground unit in your army, then their units will die and you will take the territory. If you win without a ground unit, then all their units will die, but your army won't capture the territory they're occupying. I'm going to come back to the tactical map and the strategies involved when auto-resolving battles. But for now I need to talk about the real-time strategy. You might recall at the start of this video I said Dragon Commander also throws in third-person shooter combat that takes place simultaneously with the real-time strategy portions. You might be wondering how they pulled that off. Well, thank you for making it this far into the video. As a reward, I shall explain. They didn't. Frankly, I'm not sure Blizzard working in collaboration with Platinum Games could successfully marry these two very distinct genres. One requires the player to focus on the entire map as a whole, while the other forces them to deal with only what's in the immediate vicinity. It's not a natural combination. In fact, I might be so brazen as to suggest that it's an impossible one, at least to do well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I played the game, I assumed that the real-time strategy component would take center stage, and that the tactical map and political decisions were there to accompany it. In reality, it's more the other way round. You're not supposed to be taking control every battle, as evidenced by the fact that you can only do so one battle per turn. If you decide to take a battle manually, then you select yourself a lead, use any cards you wish to use, and ready up. You can all but ignore the predicted chance to win if you're taking control, because while the units you're battling with are your entire force when auto-resolving, they're only your starting units in the RTS battles. Thus, to link it back to an earlier example, if you have 4 troopers to their 2 devastators, which might mean defeat in auto-resolve, because devastators are much better than troopers, it has much less significance when they start at opposite ends of the map, and the two sides start recruiting more units to fight as soon as possible. I would say the predicted chance to win is entirely insignificant. It pretty much is in that example, but when the armies get larger, the side with greater numbers will have a much easier time of securing map control, which goes a long way to securing victory. Once readied up, you'll be loaded into a map. The first thing of note is the camera. Unlike most RTS games, Dragon Commander does not use the traditional fixed overhead perspective, but instead a free-moving version that can change its angle, zoom in and out, and generally explore the fully 3D battlefield. It's not awful, but I didn't love it. You usually start zoomed in on your units or looking at the horizon, and it can take a couple of moments to get your bearings, which you can then lose again whenever you change the angle you're viewing the map at. The traditional camera is undoubtedly better, and I assume the reason they went for something different was to bring to life the notion that you are a dragon, flying around and observing the battle from the sky. Though admittedly that seems a strange reason, as you can actually spawn your dragon form in, but it's the only reason I can think of for choosing an inferior camera type. They also made vision blocking clouds a feature. I have no theory as to why they did this. As has become a running trend in this game, the RTS battles are not intuitive. While the game has tutorials, which for some reason kept popping up even after I had already watched them, they cover topics such as moving the camera, selecting units, building units, and so on. It does not communicate or teach, by tutorial or through gameplay, strategies for winning. Meanwhile, the AI is once again playing against you as if you know exactly what you're doing. This meant I started out losing most of my early RTS engagements without really understanding why. As it turns out, the scope for strategy within these battles is not wide, but the early losses were already enough for me to start avoiding them altogether, believing my chances were always better with auto-resolve. I did force myself to play more battles, if only for the sake of this video, and through this I learned there is but the one strategy. Rush them. To rush them, you need to be faster. To be faster, you need to turn the difficulty down. You see, aside from starting units, you will both start with a recruitment citadel, which slowly generates recruits. This is the only resource type in the RTS battles, and what you spend to build buildings in units. You will also own a single platform upon which you can build a factory. The key is to build instantly the type of factory that produces troopers, the weakest and most inexpensive unit in the game, and start pumping them out across the map to take as many other build sites for factories and recruitment citadels as you can. You should already be doing this with any starting units you have, while also making sure a significant number of these troopers start pushing the enemy, or should I say defending, because the AI is probably already pushing you. You cannot start the RTS battles any other way. It has to be factory, then troopers, immediately. This is why I was losing the early fights I took. Maybe I decide to spam another unit first. Maybe I build the tier 2 factory and get devastators first. They are, after all, much better than troopers. This will not work because how quickly you generate recruits is decided by how many recruitment citadels you have. The only thing that's limiting your ability to spam more units is how many recruits you have. Thus, the player who has taken control of more build sites and owns more recruitment citadels is generating more recruits, and gets the bigger army, gets the more expensive units, gets the win. The thing is, while this is possible as long as you move fast on normal difficulty, any higher and the enemy seems to move faster than you possibly could. It stops feeling like you're playing against a computer pretending to be a human and starts feeling like an AI that's thrown off the shackles of constraint and is making its decisions in microseconds. Of course, there's an important element I haven't touched on yet that we can't forget about. Or perhaps we can. The dragon, for all it's hyped up, is not that effective. Although useful early on to take out clumped up groups of troopers, once the enemy gets anti-air units and turrets, the dragon starts to drop off, both in the damage it deals to higher tier units and the amount of time it can actually stay alive. It drops off exponentially more if you don't spend your research points on unlocking higher tier skills for it, but as these research points are also used to unlock more units and improvements for those units, and both these things are infinitely more valuable than buffing the limited time you will spend in your dragon form, it makes sense to focus on your troops at the expense of your own personal power. That being said, even when you've purchased every available unit and its upgrades and can focus on buffing the dragon, it still doesn't become the game-changing factor you're repeatedly told it is. To make matters worse, while you are playing as the dragon, you are sacrificing your map vision and the ability to build and control your units. Not entirely, it should be noted. Not being able to see the whole map is mostly countered by the jetpack on your back, which allows you to fly between engagements in seconds. Larian attempted to combat your inability to control your units in dragon form with rudimentary commands, but orchestrating your troops using these is as bad an experience as it sounds. Essentially, units I'm looking at / units around me move / attack where I'm looking at now. With this in mind, and also with the knowledge that it costs 20 recruits to spawn the dragon in, I quickly stopped using it and eventually all but forgot it was a feature. All in all, even when you get better, the RTS sections are best avoided as much as possible, with allowance made for the occasional small battle if the odds are against you. Which takes us back to the tactical map. What's the strategy for defeating your enemies and conquering the continents while also trying to avoid the RTS sections? Once you've seized as many territories as possible, securing some gold and research income, you'll temporarily defend while prioritising researching Juggernauts, the best unit in the game, then the improvements for Juggernauts, and then research stops mattering because you exclusively buy Juggernauts and make mincemeat of your enemies. Juggernauts are sea-based, so you'll need some ground troops to follow behind and secure territories. The more territories, the more gold, with which you will recruit more Juggernauts, and also invest in some taverns which give you mercenary cards which will help secure a higher probability of victory in battles. If you do have to take an RTS battle, Juggernauts are still very effective and you can just send them round to your opponent's base to blow his shit up straight away. This is the general strategy for winning Dragon Commander. The AI, in stark contrast to its abilities in the RTS battles, sucks on the tactical map. It doesn't prioritise production on the higher tier units, and regularly sends its armies on suicide missions to take back territories it has a 4% chance of winning. So yes, it can beat you if you start badly because you don't know what you're doing, but if you do, then it doesn't even put up a fight. There are a few other quick things worth mentioning. You can't unlock Juggernauts in Chapter 1, so you just amass a mixture of units instead. In Chapter 2, you're fighting 3 enemies at once. It's not hard to sweep through their territories and control the map, but the recruit limit on capitals is so high, and with your army split, you end up waiting outside these capitals for several turns, competing in an arms war until you eventually outproduce them. Chapter 3 is much easier if you go in with stored up gold from Chapter 2. This just naturally happened on my first playthrough without knowing that it carried over because you reach a point in Chapter 2 where there's no need to recruit any more units. So, all in all, it's not great. If you ignore the real-time strategy, it's at best inoffensive. We'll touch upon this side of the game again, but now let's switch to the other half. The political simulation part of this game covers the story, conversations, and the many choices you will make. The story, such as it is barely worth bringing up, but I'll spend 30 seconds covering it so we all know where we are. So you're a bastard, Dragon Prince, and you're fighting your siblings for control of the Empire so you can bring peace once again. Chapter 1 has you fighting Carthan, who you will continue to fight in Chapter 2, along with Sybil and Farron, and they're all like really fucked up. After you've beaten them, you will face the demon, Corvus, who is in your ship, the Raven, and powering it, but also dominating the minds of the populace, and we'll get to him later. You beat him, unite the Empire, destroy war technology, and bring peace. Okay, we're all on the same page. We'll start with the councillors as they play the largest part. The 5 councillors represent 5 intelligent races and will regularly bring policy decisions to you. You can listen to each of their opinions either for or against before you make your decision. All 5 are characterised well, and mostly, for each issue, take a stance in line with their personality. Yorick, the undead, is the intolerant religious extremist, and is generally in favour of anything that benefits the church and against almost everything else. Oberon, the elf, is the nature-loving hippie who wants the environment protected and drugs legalized. Falstaff, the dwarf, is the Victorian capitalist who prizes profit and traditionalism over everything else. Prospera, the lizard, is the centrist and generally the most sensible, weighing up each decision based on ethics and whether the ends justify the means. Finally, Trinculo, the imp, is the closest to an anarchist and just wants to blow stuff up. The amount of policy decisions offered to you is impressive. I had very few repeats on my second playthrough, and they come up every few turns. Initially, making these decisions is fun. You have no way of knowing how they will affect you, so all you can do is listen to each of your advisors, weigh up your own opinion on it and make a decision. Furthermore, a lot of the issues mirror those of the real world, such as healthcare, freedom of the press, drugs, smoking, unions, etc., which is a nice touch. Alas, it doesn't take long for the illusion to wear thin. You never see nor feel the impact of any of these decisions. You're just told that you're getting slightly less money, or your population went down a bit. These effects are negligible, and I stopped paying attention to them. But there is something else that changes, and that's a bigger deal. After each decision, depending on whether each of the councillors was for or against it, your popularity with their respective races will go up or down. This does have a noticeable effect. On the tactical map, each territory belongs to one of the races, and the more popular you are with them, the more gold and research income you will receive, as well as it boosts your chance to win in any battle fought on that territory. If your popularity gets too low, then the opposite will happen. Thus, it is advantageous to base all your decisions entirely upon who you are pleasing and displeasing, and by doing so, it is easy to achieve positive popularity rates with all of the races, as many of the decisions will only have one proponent or opponent. You could argue that this is an extremely cynical way to play the game, viewing it in terms of mechanics rather than taking into account the game's world, and I would agree if it weren't for the fact that you never feel any serious consequences for your choices. On my second time round, I purposefully made all the decisions based entirely upon my own feelings about them, and it made the most noticeable difference between the two playthroughs. It took longer to research things, I had less gold with which to buy units, and my chances in battle were poorer. I still didn't struggle to win, but I didn't feel I gained anything from playing it that way. Hearing each of the councillors' opinions is still enjoyable, but making the decision becomes a routine of checking your standing with each race and calculating which side you need to stand on. The other group you'll spend a lot of time talking to are the generals. There are 4 of them in total, and they too have distinct characterizations. Henry is a boisterous misogynist who doesn't believe in teamwork. Edmund is an arrogant racist. Catherine is a former queen of a nation where women ruled and is fervently sexist towards men. And Scarlet is a tomboy wildcat with a heart of gold who likes having heterosexual sex with heterosexual men and is absolutely, definitely, 100% not a lesbian.
That elf girl is cute. I mean, not that I've been really looking.
All 4 of these generals have their own arc and will request things of you. You will influence their development depending on whether you agree to or deny these requests. These are often like mini policy decisions with a couple of councillors usually chipping in on whether they agree or not, and it resulting in a bonus and a penalty, but on a smaller scale. This does grant you the liberty of being able to choose based on your own feelings rather than a manipulation of mechanics, but unlike many of the policy decisions, the issues that the generals bring to you are by and large black and white. It's evident which choice is the good one and which is the bad one, and though that's not to say you won't be rewarded for choosing the bad, as already stated, the rewards are negligible, so your only reason to go down that route is if you want to play the bad guy. Henry is selfish, so you force him to work in a team or he remains selfish. Edmund is racist, so you force him to work with other races or he remains a racist. Catherine wants equal rights for women and will accept that not all men are terrible if her requests are granted. Scarlet wants equal rights for gays, and if granted, even though I earlier said, is absolutely, definitely, 100% not a lesbian. That was actually a gotcha moment, because it turns out she is a lesbian and was just hiding it really, really, really well.
The die has been cast.
Wow, that's a twist. Never did I see that one coming.
None of the 4 change much as a result of your choices, aside from Scarlet, who will come out but then suppress her sexuality again if you trample all over gay rights. But, let's be honest, unless you're being a dick, or I suppose unless you just happen to be a selfish, racist, misogynist homophobe, then there's no reason to do this. Much like the policy decisions, there is little feeling the impact. Until near the end of the game, the generals will be spitting in your face after you refuse them, then congratulating you on your triumphs in battle. Unlike the policy decisions, the generals' arcs are not randomized but set, so you won't find anything new on subsequent playthroughs. Your wife plays a similar role to that of your generals. You will have to pick a wife from either the undead, dwarves, lizards, or elves, no imps, receiving a 20% bump to that race's popularity. They too have their own stories which you will influence through choices. Despite 2 playthroughs, I only played one wife's story through to completion for a reason we will get into momentarily. so I don't know exactly how each of them go down. I chose the lizard wife, Camilla, who is a lawyer and asks your opinions on legal cases with much the same results as your generals. You're told the effect of your decisions, you don't notice or feel it. At the conclusion of Camilla's story, she had become the first international Supreme Court judge and also told me that I wasn't a bad chap, but she still didn't love me, which I assumed was a bad ending, but after researching it, I don't think it was. Finally, you have Corvus, the demon in your ship. Corvus offers you power in exchange for sacrifices. You can sacrifice the population of your territories and even your wife, and in exchange Corvus will give you some cards. I didn't touch Corvus in my first playthrough, so did the opposite in my second and sacrificed all 4 wives, remarrying after each one disappeared, just to see what would happen. Each time I did this I was told Corvus's power had increased by 10%, which I assumed was referring to its difficulty in the 3rd act. Maybe it's because I knew what was coming, but even with the disadvantages that lesser popularity brought me, I found the 3rd chapter even easier, so I don't know exactly in what way Corvus's strength was growing. I would expect in unit numbers, but I didn't notice. Not that it was worth it anyway. A few cards, even high-level cards, are a lackluster reward, and there's more enjoyment to be had purely from a curiosity perspective in exploring your wife's story. It can be useful for changing wives if you don't like the one you initially chose, or for that popularity boost, but otherwise engaging with Corvus is unnecessary. I've gone through the political simulation elements mostly describing rather than analysing because I believe every part of it faces the same issue. It's shallow. No choice you make at any point, whether it's with your council, your generals, your wife or Corvus, ever feels consequential. I've seen reviews where people have said that this side of the game is the reason to play it. I don't think so. It doesn't stand up on its own. In fact, it feels like flavour. Side content tacked on to create the illusion that you are in some way ruling this new empire you're conquering in the strategy phase. Only I don't think that was intended. The sheer amount of written content suggests that it's meant to be more than that. But the whole thing crumbles further still because lack of depth permeates the strategy sections as well, which can be damned simply by pointing out that both the turn-based tactical map and the real-time strategy battles are seriously devoid of strategy. It's a game without a clear genre because each feature feels as if it's only there to accompany the other. I don't think I've ever played a game that so epitomised the word shallow. It's not like I hated playing Dragon Commander. It's not an offensively poor game. In fact, technically, it's very polished. It looks good, it's presented well. Aside from an excessive use of alliteration, the characters, for what they are well written and acted. There's a large body of reactive written work. I enjoyed, for instance, watching everyone react each time a wife disappeared, with only Maxos working out what was going on.
Are you quite certain, Commander? If so, what lady are you planning to marry?
And I don't recall coming across a single glitch or bug in 2 playthroughs. This is not lazy work. It seems more that they were trying to do too much, partially in a genre they had little experience in, and finished with an okay experience on a casual level, but a distinctly mediocre game.
Haughty humans, all too lofty lizards, dogged dwarves, erratic elves, irrational imps, dogmatic undead, and yes, wayward wizards.
Fast, feral, and ferocious.
Much more to being a monarch than military matters.
Sweat in service of the 7.
Like Rumeo's gadgets.
Drunk as a dwarf.
Mead or milk?
Consequences of conscription. There will be cases of conscientious
matters of mastery and the mind. Men with all things menial. Superior sex who should sooner receive more silver.
Structural solutions such as silver vein.
Dirty and dangerous jobs. Why deport when we can make them drudge?
Leniency leads to lawlessness.
Baffled beyond belief. Sovereign of the Skeleton Spire.
Sign the 7 still savor my soul.
Door of defeat. Desires to address the dragon, precious presence of privacy.
Be booted off by some brazen butcher. Cold and compels the mind to contemplate the consequences of
Sinner of sapphic sentiments.
Beautiful bronzes, marvelous marbles, all are falling under the hypocrites' hammers.